Hey, Fiends of the Pod, Nate Wyckoff, your host here again, reminding you like, subscribe, and yes, it is hard to come up with these extra little special things for every episode. But like my good friend behind me, Godzilla, I will not stop until every single building in a metropolitan area is destroyed if you don't like and subscribe. Enjoy, and please go to cultandclassicfilms.com to pick up exclusive cult movies, and also you can subscribe and have them delivered at a discount to your door every single month. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Cult and Classic.
Welcome, Fiends of the Pod, to another episode of Cult and Classic Podcast. Today it is war. We are covering two films from 1988. The first being The Beast of War, also known as The Beast, depending on the release, and 1988's TROMA'S War, also known as War. These are very different films that are both war-themed, and I can't wait to dive in. I am your host, as always, Nate Wyckoff, reviewer for HorrorNews.net and comedian, and we also have with us the wonderful Mandy Longley. How are you doing, Mandy?
Oh, I'm fabulous.
And of course. And Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm a spooky ghost for all of the Patreon people, so you can see that, I guess.
Yes, Greg Johnson is translucent for this episode. Again, if you want to join our Patreon, not only do you get all of our awesome content, you get videos of us so you can see us discuss these films. You can also see our most of our interviewees as well, like Josh Urganell, aka Peaches Christ, Donald Farmer, things like that. And if you donate $5 or $10 a month, which is not that much, Starbucks does not need your money as much as we do, then you get awesome stuff like autographed custom trading cards every month, zines every month with different themes that we put out. So a lot of great stuff. So head over to patreon.com/thecult and, excuse me, I did it wrong. Patreon.com/cult and classic podcast. Don't go to anything else. We love you more than they do. Okay, so the first movie, I'm really excited to talk about this. This is The Beast, or The Beast of War from 1988. This is actually a fan recommendation. Nick, shout out to Nick, sent us an email to cultandclassicpodcast@gmail.com recommending this, and I'm so glad he did because I think there's a lot to talk about here. This is a war movie. It's about there are no American soldiers in this movie, even though there's an American cast for a lot of it. It is about a Soviet tank during Russia's war in Afghanistan, which history buffs and people paying attention to the current Afghanistan conflict that the United States is enmeshed in and arguably created. Russia was there first, and they tried very similar things that the U.S. is trying, and they failed and they left. And I believe it was Rudyard Kipling. I could be wrong, but I think it was Rudyard Kipling who called it the grave of armies, Afghanistan, something along those lines. And it's because it's a very difficult terrain. The Afghani people, the rebel factions who don't want to give in to outside powers, are very strong, and they're very resilient. So it is a tough place to try and wage war. And this movie follows a Soviet tank who, at the beginning of the film, obliterates and brutalizes an Afghani village in retaliation to rebel attacks. And then they get separated from their unit, and they are stuck in a canyon, which turns out to be essentially a cul-de-sac. They don't know that in the beginning, but they're trying to get to the Kandahar Road, and they are stuck. So they're being trailed by the survivors of the village, which they ransacked and destroyed. And the survivors have one RPG, a missile weapon that is capable of taking out a tank, and several rounds. And they are trying to use that to destroy the tank while the Soviet tank soldiers are trying to survive and fend off the attacks. It's fascinating. It's based on a play by William Mastrosimone, and he also wrote the screenplay. Apologize if I butcher that name. I'm sure Tad Mastroianni, our longtime guest here, would probably be able to give me a better pronunciation. It's directed by Kevin Reynolds. Kevin Reynolds is a very well-known director. Most people have seen films by him. He directed Waterworld in 1995. He directed Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, also with Kevin Costner in 1991. Tristan and Isolde in 2006. It's interesting. You look at his resume, and he has movies that are critically and publicly lauded, like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, The Count of Monte Cristo in 2002. And then you have others that are kind of known as large-budget flops, such as Waterworld old and Tristan and Isolde. And I will say that Beast of War is a very, in my opinion, well-directed film. The visuals as well as the audio that accompany a very ambient soundtrack is truly, it puts you in a different place, especially being someone from the United States. I'm in California. It's a desert, but it's a different kind of desert. Okay, this is some dry, parched land. It's hot. It beats down. It's oppressive on the cast, and I think that it works in its favor. I've talked a lot here. Just going into that, Greg, what did you expect going into this movie, and how were those expectations met or bucked?
Well, I mean, considering some of the other films we watched, I was expecting pretty much fucking anything. I think I was bucked though, because I was ready for something a little more culty, and this was a real classic. This was good. Thank you, whoever our listener that recommended it.
Thanks to Nick.
Really good. Yeah. I thought it was interesting that it was based off of a play, which, since you butchered the last name of the writer, let me butcher the name of the play, Nanawati, which they say during the film and discuss. I'm kind of curious why they didn't keep that name for the movie going forward, just because the Beast, or even the Beast of War, they never, like, you'd kind of think that since it's about this tank, really, they refer to the tank at some point as...
Well, it's interesting. They refer to it as the Beast, but they refer to it as a beast in the Afghani language. So they don't actually say the Beast. It does seem like a marketing technique. And you mentioned the word that means, essentially, it's sort of like, for those of us in the US, the Pirates of the Caribbean, like parlay, right? Like it's like, essentially, I beg for your mercy, even though you're my enemy, kind of thing. And let's listen to this. This is actually where Nanawati is brought up. And again, apologies for my super white pronunciation. But this is the actor Eric Avari, who is super fantastic. He was Cecil and Mr. Deeds, Dr. Terrence Bay in The Mummy of 1999. He was Kasuf in Stargate, 1994, one of my favorite films. Basically, anytime a big United States film needed a Middle Eastern appearing individual who had sort of a wise man vibe, they chose Avari, and it's totally worth it. He is incredible, and I think that he has a very kind demeanor, and it plays to his role in this, where he is an Afghani man who's been educated outside of Afghan, so he speaks English, and he's working as the translator and a soldier in the Soviet tank unit, but he's not trusted by the commander and the other soldiers, except for Konstantin Kovarchenko, who is essentially the main character of the Russians. He's played by Jason Patric, and he's trying to get to know and understand and learn from Avari's character here. And let's listen to this. This is a conversation after they've gotten lost, and they've already been attacked by the rebels once, and now they're camped out at night by the tank.
It's called Pashtunwali. It's the code of honor.
Pashtunwali.
3 obligations. First, milmastia, hospitality.
Milmastia.
Second, badal, revenge.
Badal.
Third, nanawate, the obligation to give sanctuary to all those who ask.
To all.
All.
Even the enemy.
All.
What if I kill your brother? And you come for badal, revenge, and I ask for Nanawati?
Then I would be obligated to feed, clothe, and protect you.
It's incredibly civilized. What is it? Nanawati?
Nanawate.
So, and again, I want to mention that speaking with Avari is Jason Patric's character, Konstantin Kovarchenko. And Jason Patric, listeners will recognize him as Michael from The Lost Boys. So he plays a very different role here, and I think he kind of shows his acting chops. But this is what you were talking about, right, Greg? This word that what they titled the play after, which is, I think you're right, much more representative of the play, this idea of asking for forgiveness in the face of terror and offense and death, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a much stronger title, but to your point, I think it probably was just marketing that, this seemingly unpronounceable word to anyone that, finds Tabasco spicy, would, maybe see a film called The Beast and be like, oh, like I could get on that. Oh, The Beast of War. Now you got me.
Yeah, and it's the beast. It's a much more aggressive word, right? And I think it set me up, at least not knowing, not being familiar with the film before we watched it, to think that it would be very action-packed. And it's interesting. There are definitely action scenes, and the tension is extreme, but it's actually not an action film at its heart, I don't think. It's really a character play, which makes sense as to why it was a stage play, between these different people and how they're reacting to war. Mandy, when you went into this film, what's your take on that? Did you expect something different? How did it come out?
I went into this film and the other film we watched this week completely blind. I just downloaded them and watched them. So I had no expectations going in. I did like how The Beast started out with a quote from Rudyard Kipling, specifically about the women in the war and how they were extremely, considered extremely fierce. And so that kind of set some expectations about the interactions with the characters. I had no expectations. I enjoyed some aspects of this one, and then there were other aspects that I was glad that they were left in the 80s.
And this is for those interested, who Rudyard Kipling, if you're not familiar, he wrote the stories that the Jungle Book is based off of. He wrote a lot of literature about war as well. He wrote many things. A very excellent writer. This is the movie opens with the quote from a selection from The Young British Soldier, a poem that he wrote, and this is the selection. When you're wounded and left on Afghanistan's plains, and the women come out to cut up what remains, just roll to your rifle and blow out your brains, and go to your God like a soldier. So it's not a pleasant poem, and I think that you're right. I think it sets up the mood for this as well. And those who know me and my film preferences know that I tend not to gravitate towards war films, at least not mainstream ones. And there's a reason for that. I am not a huge fan of the grandiose nationality and that they often put into the honor role of these films. So for example, and this is not saying anything against the expert cinematography or acting or writing or cast or any number of things about these films, but Saving Private Ryan. I did not enjoy Saving Private Ryan. The reason is because I don't buy in when you're trying to do a film that's purportedly realistic, the idea that this sort of heavy-handed sacrifice that seems small or meaningful is going to be in play. We've all know, I think it's hard for any of us to say we don't know a soldier or someone who's been in some branch of service at least in the United States. I imagine it's similar elsewhere. And it's not that, even if you're, a good soldier and you fight what you think is a just and good war, that sort of gallantry is not what you do all the time. It's a job, right? It's a job, and that job often comes with very dire consequences for you and other people. And so when I see a film like Saving Private Ryan and people love it and they go see it and they talk about it, and then I see it, I'm very disappointed by what feels like sort of a hollow, false narrative that it's all worth it in the end because this person sacrificed themselves. The Beast really, in my opinion, is fantastic because it bucks that. It's one of those films that says, it muddies the water. We really follow two groups of people who are completely at odds in this film, right? You aren't just seeing the rebel Afghanis from far away and like, oh, they're just, shooting rockets at us and then we're driving away and killing one of them, shooting and back and forth. You go from the Soviets in the tank dealing with their personal issues and their situation and where they're coming from to the Afghani group, where they're the ones in their mind that are being attacked. I mean, they essentially have been invaded, and they're the ones that are in the right. So you get each group's perspective, and when you get those kind of combating ideologies, it makes for a gray, muddy water, right? You just can't say this group is in the right, this group is in the wrong. And it gets even more murky when the film starts to put in all these individual characters with different motives and different personalities, right? Like every single person is, well, all of the main characters are very identifiable in this film, right? In the tank, you have Patric's character, who's sort of the, I don't know if I'd call him a Dostoevsky character. He's like in the gray, right? He's doing what he's doing because he has to, and he thinks he has no choice. You have Avari's character, Samad, the translator, who's like, I'm doing this because I believe Afghan needs to move into the future. I love my country, and I think that this is the way to join the world. I think at one point he says we're like a flea on a bear's tail, and the bear being the Russia, but also more largely the Western world and technology, right? And he's like, we have to, because eventually we will die, or the bear will crush us, or whatever. We have to assimilate. And that's his point of view. But then you have the commander of the tank, who is really a standout character here, George Dzunda, and he's been a soldier since he was 8 years old, and this is his life, and he's sort of obsessed with his tank, and that is his world, right? And it's sort of an Ahab whale situation. And then you have the Afghanis, and you have them with one person is like, my family was just killed, now I'm the Khan, leader of the village, right? And now I have to make the decisions, and it's not just me anymore, it's all of my people. You have the woman whose husband was brutally murdered by the tankers at the beginning of the film, who she doesn't care what the Khan says, she wants bloody revenge, right? So you have all of these people. It's like you have two groups, and then you start to break into subgroups, and it just makes the water too muddy to say this is a heroic act, this is an evil act. And I really enjoyed that about The Beast. Getting into that, let's talk about that opening scene, right? Because that's really I mean, they didn't waste any time getting us set up. It's sort of like a Lion King moment in the beginning, right? We see these big open plains of Afghanistan, and then we see like these sleeping dogs, which I've heard there are wild dogs in Afghanistan. I don't know what kind they are. They look adorable, but I imagine they're not when you run across them. But and then we get to this village that's very much what we imagine a village in Afghanistan from United States news stories to look like. It's been tumbled down several times in its history, but it has people living there, getting water, making food, drying laundry, also shining old Soviet weapons, and then the tanks roll in, right? And then we just get explosions, slaughter of everyone indiscriminately, and then we get this scene where a character who we find out is the new Khan's brother before killed, and the other brother becomes the Khan, who fires an RPG and he misses, okay? And they catch him, and Dzunda's commander character essentially says, put him under the track of the tank, and he will tell us where the rest are. And then with all of his surviving villagers watching, he refuses to say it, and Konstantin Kovarchenko drives the tank and crushes him completely. And it's a really gruesome scene. We don't actually see it, but we see the aftermath, and it's essentially just a bloody mound of flat. It's like a horrible pizza, right? And I don't know about anybody else, but this is the moment to me where the film, probably 10 minutes in, if that, says, this is your message for the movie, and we will carry this out to the very end. And I wasn't sure, what were your reactions on that scene? Mandy, what did you think when that happened?
First of all, I just moved and my Zoom background was flipped. So,
And he's a ghost.
I'm a ghost. So I was blown away by the opening cinematography of the whole scene, of just like the opening of the movie. And then I was just really like just like drawn into this world and like trying to figure out like what is this movie all about, because I didn't watch a preview or read anything about the movie before I watched it. So I'm like, who's the protagonist and the antagonist of this movie? And as the movie like unfolds, like even a little bit through this scene, it's like it's kind of unclear. Like, I'm like, oh, clearly the Russians must be the bad guys, are like doing this horrible stuff, but like there's also some like context in history that sort of points at like, well, is like retaliation for other things that are going on, and like maybe they're looking for specific like players in this theater of war or something. So yeah, it was just like, it was very it just drew me in. It was very compelling.
Well, and the cinematography, as you mentioned, it's a huge part of this movie, right? We essentially look at desert and then some sweaty people and a tank and there's one cave that we see at one point, but that's all we see for an hour and 49 minutes. And I personally did not find it dull. It's very, very well done. And Doug Milson is the cinematographer for this film, also works later with Kevin Reynolds on Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, but also is probably most well known for being a cinematographer on Full Metal Jacket. So this is not Doug Milson's first rodeo with a war film, but also, I mean, these big budget films, and he's still working today, really excellent work. And I think that it helps set the tone. Greg, what was your take on this first major battle that really sets up both sides, right?
I mean, like Mandy said, I mean, I think it really sets kind of this this tone of we have a lot of action going on. I mean, they are really laying into this little village, and it's not grand though. You don't feel good about it. You're watching them just blow this place apart, and like Mandy said, I mean, you're kind of like, well, maybe they're looking for someone, but you don't get the sense that they're there to really do anything seriously strategic. It's just kind of, we're gonna wear the enemy down by killing them. They're civilians, like all of them.
Yeah, you believe when the Afghani rebels show up there after it's been, essentially mortared. I mean, they're firing tank frag shells into shacks the size of, a 10 by 10 room, right? In some of these cases, like they're laying waste to it for really what seems like no reason to us. And then they catch people and they really don't seem to have a great reason either. But he says, why did they do this? The new Khan says, why did they do this? And the older man that they refer to as uncle says retaliation. And that really is it, right? Like it sounds just like, oh, well, we got attacked back there, so our orders are to go and just blow shit up to sort of eye for an eye. And it sort of adds this, I mean, of course, we're talking about it's not Christianity in this case, although we could probably assume that the Soviet soldiers are Christian if they are religious, and then we have the Afghani rebels who would be a form of follow a form of Islam, and it feels biblical to those of us in Western society, right? You're in a place that we see most often when we're watching some sort of Bible story biopic. And it's eye for an eye. It is a nasty, cruel situation. And you're seeing, like you said, you don't feel good about it right away. You don't feel good about it. There's no triumphant music. It's not a glorious, it's not an A-team, right? Nobody's like flying off of a building like, haha, like, oh, what a stunt. It's impossible to watch it and admire the technicality of it. Because it's gruesome and it's unpleasant and it's uncomfortably realistic. The gore is good, but it isn't another. I'm gonna rag on Saving Private Ryan, I guess, today. Another thing, it's like Saving Private Ryan. It's like, oh, this guy gets shot in the head. Oh, this guy takes his helmet off for 1 second, gets shot in the head. It's not that it. I mean, I certainly wasn't there, so I can't speak to it. There are many soldiers who said that it was like that, and I totally understand and respect that. But when we're shown it on film, why are we seeing it? Is it to make an effect, or is it for the sake of gratuity? And in this, I found it more horrible because what we saw was not gratuitous. It felt much more realistic. It's like there are people who are just wounded, and then there are just people who are dead. And yes, maybe that person is missing a limb, but most of them are just dead. And it's really uncomfortable. And it looks more like news footage than it does a very slick production. And of course we get this. One thing I'll say about the realism that is interesting, and I'm divided on it, is my wife watches with me, and they made the decision to none of the Soviet soldiers speak with that shticky American version of a Russian accent. Everyone speaks in their natural voice and cadence, which for the Soviets, the Afghanis speak in an Afghani dialect, I assume. It sounds legitimate to me. I certainly don't know. I'm no expert. I'm sure others who know more about it would have different opinions. But the Soviets speak in their normal tone of voice, which are varying degrees of U.S. English accents. And on one hand, I respect that decision because so often we typically see it in movies where they try and give them a fake British accent and it doesn't work very well. Like, oh, well, this person has like a Welsh accent and this person has like a central London accent and it stands out to us, but we just kind of accept it and move on. By the same token, I kept having to remind myself that these were Soviet soldiers and not United States military. And I don't know which would have been better for my desensitized lens. If they tried to make them sound somewhat Russian, so I would have thought I would have remembered that they're Russian or not. Because it does something. I don't know if you guys felt that way or not. It does something to be like, oh, these guys are speaking English in the way I expect an English person to speak English, like an American person to speak English. It made me think that they were just like me, which is more disturbing because of course they are. And Russian people are just like me. And so are Afghani people. Like people are people, right? But when we see a war movie, we expect them to have different accents. And that way we can go, oh, but they're whatever, they're Ukrainian. That's different than me. And in this case, we don't take that. It's taken away from us. The Russians who, 1988, of course, were still feeling the effects of the Cold War. And now, of course, we still have tension sort of renewed with Russia. We're getting this vibe of they're just like us. And I wondered, this is a long way to go to this, but I wondered if that was one of the reasons you guys think that this film is not well known in the United States. Because as you said, it's got a fantastic cinematography, very tense atmosphere, and I think it's a very well done movie, yet I certainly had never heard of it.
Yeah, I think you have a good point about the accents and the Russian. I actually found myself thinking a lot of those things when I watched it as well, and almost to the point of wondering why they just didn't have them speak Russian, and subtitle the entire movie, because it starts out with the Afghanis speaking and subtitled. Mm-hmm. And then eventually they switch to English and they have an accent that reminds you of where their origin, but they never do that with the Russian soldiers. And the only way you really know that they're Russian soldiers is at the beginning when they kind of comment on that. And then there's a couple of context clues and commentary throughout the film, but it's I thought it was a little weird that they didn't even start the movie in Russian with the subtitles and then switch everybody to English for English-speaking audience convenience.
Yeah, I have an idea on that. But Greg, did that affect you at all? Did you have what was your take on the accent choice?
I think I liked it when you started talking about it. I think that really clicked with me, that it made me connect with them more. It made me kind of see the Soviets in this film as they could be like me. They could be like American soldiers. And I don't know if that effect would have been reached if they'd all had, Rocky and Bullwinkle accents. But I think I agree with Mandy too. I think I would have liked it a lot more if they all just spoke Russian and the whole film was subtitled. Maybe it would have downgraded how many people knew about it, and maybe even less people would know about it. Like you said, it's not a widely known film, but I think I could have dug that quite a bit, that we kind of see just another war in Afghanistan and kind of recognize the parallels on our own without having to be spoon-fed it by having them talk just like us.
Yeah, that's why I think that there's benefits to both sides, right? And the idea of having them speak Russian, I imagine marketing was a big decision about it, but I also wonder if it was more a technical choice that was, well, probably none of the cast we want speaks Russian at all.
Yeah.
And also, if we have, I think that I think the decision to have the Afghani rebels speak in non-American language, because they actually are dubbed the whole time. And I think that I think Mustafa, he calls him, the Khan calls him cousin. I think he uses some, if I remember correct, some English words every once in a while. I think that it's almost indicative of the cross pollination of the West. And we actually, because when he uses English words, we don't know if it's supposed to be that he's using English words. It's probably that he's using then Russian words that are just being spoken in English. It gets this weird, like, tricky thing. And that sort of makes sense, right? Because that Mustafa character that the Khan's always arguing with, even though he's on his side kind of, is what they call a scavenger, right? He's the one that they kill Russian soldiers to take their equipment and sell their equipment. And so he's more interested in his own monetary gain. And that's sort of that idea of, even though the Soviets at this point were pushing for communism, it's really it's a commercial communism, right? They're still working in the world marketplace, and people are making money. They're oligarchs. So I thought that was an interesting play. My thought on it's sort of like when we talked about Videodrome, if those of us, our listeners, haven't listened to our episode of Videodrome and Terrorvision yet, go back. I think we got some really awesome stuff in there, and those are interesting movies to look at. But Videodrome took place before the internet was known at all, yet had strong connections, I think, to our current internet. And this movie similarly has, even more so, huge connections to the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, which is interesting because, of course, this is before the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan at all. But because we're watching it now, I found myself constantly being like, I wonder if they did that because, oh, wait, they couldn't have. They didn't have a crystal ball telling them what was going to happen in the future. But my guess is that this film doesn't rerun on TNT constantly or USA Network because it has a distinctly uncomfortable message for those of us living in the United States right now. Of course, there are lots of other things on our plate at the moment with COVID and our dumpster fire of a presidency, all these things. But when I watched this movie, it made me think, okay, the decision to have them not just speaking as they normally would in US English, but very distinctly unique accents of English. Especially from the commander, it made me think that they were speaking on a directly meta level to me as an American, saying, look at what happens when you go to war. And the commander's character's name is Daskal, and again, that's George Dzunda. And there's an interesting parallel between that's drawn by the character of Kovarchenko in this movie, because Kovarchenko, the plot of the movie is this tank's being chased by the rebels, right? But the big turning point is that the commander starts to turn on his own men, right? He's very protective of his tank. He doesn't trust Samad's character, and there's this brutal scene where first he tries to get Kovarchenko to kill Samad, right? He tells him to get out of the tank and check the perimeter because they just have gone crazy shooting and blowing a flamethrower into the dark because they saw 25 soldiers trip their sensors they'd put out. Well, he tells Samad to go out and check for survivors. And then while Samad is outside, the commander tries to get Kovarchenko to kill him from inside the tank. He says he's a traitor. I know it. I can tell. Kill him. And he won't do it. And when, of course, Samad comes back in, he's like, they were deer. There were no people. You killed deer. And that comes into play later because after humiliating Samad, when he's trying to do his prayers to Mecca, he sends him into a river, which one of the soldiers has just urinated in just to throw extra spite on the fire. And then he shoots him in cold blood. And Kovarchenko's horrified. And that's that turning point where we see that Kovarchenko isn't just unhappy, but he's moving to that point of nihilism, right? Where it's like, it doesn't matter what I do anymore, so I might as well do what I want, which is go against the commander. And it results in the commander eventually tying him to a rock in the middle of the desert and sticking a live grenade under him so that if he moves, the grenade will potentially blow up. And it's a booby trap for the Afghani rebels to find who are tracking the tank. Of course, he gets out, and then he says Nanwati to the Khan, and the Khan respects that. And then Kovalchenko literally turns to the rebels and says, yes, I will help you kill the tank because I know how to fix and use this RPG. And then
I wanted to kind of going back to what we were talking about with them, speaking in English with clearly American accents. At the end of the film, I thought it was interesting when, all's said and done and Pachenko kind of tells off his commander. And I think he literally calls him a Nazi or refers to them as like the Nazis. And, I'm not Russian. I don't live in Russia. I don't know what their feelings are on their alliance with Germany and then Germany's betrayal of them and how they view them, like how we do here in the States anyway. But I thought that was a weird choice to have him kind of like use an example of evil that American audiences would understand. And I don't know if someone in Russia would kind of hear that the same. And that was, one of the last lines of the movie, or just about. Yeah, that's kind of the message that we're ending on.
Well, and let's listen to this. This is the commander, George Jasunda's character Daskal, talking to everyone in the tank that's left. Samad has been killed, and it's I believe this falls pretty much right before Kovalchenko is tied to a rock. Basically, they're in the tank. It's dark, and here he's talking.
When I was 8 years old, defending Stalingrad, I didn't think for myself. When the motherland asked for our lives, we gave. My father didn't think of himself, he gave. My mother didn't think of herself, she gave. My brother didn't think of himself, he gave. My comrades tied a rope around my waist and lowered me on top of Nazi tanks. I stuffed Molotovs under turret and cannon, and then they pulled me up again, 8 years old. They called me Tank Boy. I took a lot of Nazi tanks. A lot.
So there's this interesting thing, like we kind of get the feeling that he's already snapped a little bit, right? Although I think that that's sort of a loaded term, because when we say snapped, we think that there's this like on-off switch. It's that moment when a character goes crazy. This character is not going crazy this is his character. This has been his character. He is not progressing towards madness. He is this person.
Yeah.
And this was really interesting because the idea is that Kovalchenko, which again, kind of this, I think Dostoevsky, it's sort of like he is educated, unhappy, and he's also got the logbook, right, where he's keeping record of all the actions of everyone, the demerits, the accomplishments, things that are very dangerous to Daskal, like him killing Samad in cold blood, or his gunner who was distilling liquor from the brake fluid, causing their brakes to be problematic in the tank. Like, all of these are being written down and physically kept by Constantine's character, and that makes him extra dangerous. And he is now, because he is somehow problematic for the commander, he's a traitor. And he thinks for himself is the big problem in Daskal's eyes, right? He thinks for himself, and that's why he goes off on this tangent. And then when you were talking about Kovalchenko calling him a Nazi at the end, it's almost a little more than that, right? He's not just saying, like, you're a Nazi. He's saying, how does it feel, essentially, for us to be the Nazis this time? Yeah. Because they're the invading force. And following blindly then is the implication, as he says you're supposed to do as a soldier, causes exactly what he was so proud to have fought against. And it literally just crushes him. I think that that's the moment where the commander, his tank's been destroyed, so his one sense of like he's so proud of it, right? Like that's his world. That's destroyed at the end. Finally, it can't be moved. The tread is blown off, and they're left to just wander in the desert, presumably for God knows what, to die, presumably. But of course, the women show up and brutally murder Daskal, which it's hard to argue that he didn't deserve it. If he just wandered through the desert and we didn't see what happened, it would, at least for my American sensibilities, be a little disappointing.
Yeah, for a film that definitely wasn't about glorifying war, there was something very satisfying about watching those Afghan women just beat him to death.
So probably
They
stone
were
him,
all
right?
about the stoning.
Oh yeah,
They were all about the stoning.
And they're and it's interesting because we'll get into this with TROMA'S War too, but there is a surprising amount of parallels between these two films, even though they are radically different films with of a radically different caliber and genre.
Yeah.
But it really is sort of, I like, there's a lot of mirrored scenes in this film. For example, and it probably comes from its background as a play, which is there's the scene early on we listened to where Kovalchenko is talking to Samad and they're eating bread. He offers them bread and they're eating and they're learning about each other. And more than they're learning about each other, they're sort of finding this connection between each other. And then Samad's dead. Kovalchenko's been betrayed by his commander and he's been given an uncomfortable parlay by the Khan, and they're in a cave, and he's given bread, and when he's eating, and he's supposed to eat first before anybody else can get it, right? So he's offered bread, he takes the bread, and then he and the Khan begin to form their relationship, which is interesting. It's a different relationship than we saw with Samad because they have a different level of communication ability between each other. But I thought it was very interesting because Kovalchenko is he's in both scenes, but he's sort of on the opposite side. He's offering bread in the first one and learning from Samad. But in the second one, he's being given bread and he's teaching. He's repairing the RPG. He's offering his skills or granting his skills when asked. And so that's an interesting parallel. And then we have another one that's even broader, more less concrete parallel, but I think even stronger, which is the end of the film. The end of the film is, of course, the soldiers, the surviving tank members are sent off. The women killed Daskal. And then they bring back, they say, sorry, Khan, couldn't do what you wanted. And she's covered in blood and she drops the bloody boots and belt of the commander in the dirt. And he's horrified because for twofold. One, it's gross, but also probably because he's been defied, right? Like he's still trying to find his leadership. He's only been Khan for what, like 2 days? And then Khan is like, he's trying to get Kovalchenko to come with him. And Kovalchenko does it first. They retreat because there's a Soviet chopper coming in. And they start to pull him in. And then Kovalchenko stops and he keeps the rifle, the Afghani decorated rifle that the Khan has given him, but he takes off everything else. And he waves down the chopper and they pick him up in a hoist. And he's carried off through the air, just hanging there, right? And it's super interesting to me, and I don't know if you guys felt the same way too, because I was trying to think, why does this feel satisfying to me? Because it's a very open-ended moment to end a film on. And my feeling was, at the beginning of the film, Kovalchenko is just following orders. When he crushes the Khan's brother with the tank, he's essentially forced by the commander to do so. And then Samad later says, you always have a choice. You know, it may not be a fun choice. You may not want to make the choice, but you always have a choice. But in the beginning of the film, Kovalchenko doesn't see it that way. He's powerless and he's just going with the current. But then he makes this choice in the middle, right, to work with the Khan and blow up the tank. And then at the end, he goes and he's physically going with the flow. He is 100% not in control of his ability to do anything. So it's sort of like at the beginning, he's in that position, and at the end, he's in that position. And we're left to wonder, what is the actual change that occurred? Because he made a clear choice in the middle. And then at the end, he's chosen to potentially go back to what he just was at in the beginning of the film. We don't know. Is he going to go for a discharge and go home? Is he trying to get back to Russia? Is he going back to the military, right? Because the commander insinuated that he's been insubordinate before and that his next step for insubordination will be prison. So we just don't know. And that's a really weird moment. It makes it feel so, it made me feel like there is no hope for the situation. Right? Which sort of goes back to that Rudyard Kipling poem in the beginning. Like, oh, you want to do this? Well, here's how you do it right. You shoot yourself in the head because there's no way to do it right. That's the only eventuality. I don't know what your guys' take was on that, because to me, watching him fly through the air just completely limp as the credits rolled was powerful, and it took me a while to discover why, for me, I felt that worked.
I guess, I mean, my initial reaction was opposite of yours. I felt hopeful that he saw his choice of, he could stay there and just kind of live this new life, and that was fine, but he had kind of been doing the same thing in the Soviet army. He'd just kind of been there living his life.
He's still in war, right?
Yeah.
Like,
but if he went back, he was the record keeper. So his job is, you know, he's probably not going to change anyone's mind, but he's going to tell the tale of this happening. And maybe one other person, you know, kind of gets the message of maybe we shouldn't be in Afghanistan anymore. And kind of that, like, he's willing to take the long journey. He's willing to plant the seeds he may never see grow, that sort of thing. And also, you know, we liked him. He was our protagonist, right. And it was happy to see him survive. Yeah. So that's why I took it as hopeful, with just the surface level. He's alive. He's escaping. Great. That's what we want as a viewer. And then maybe a little bit under the surface of, he's making the hard choice to probably get court-martialed. I mean, most likely.
Well, because we don't know, the other two soldiers are alive, right?
Yeah.
So, and they probably are not that far off. So are they going to pick them up, and what are they going to say? Right? Because in one, it looks like he saved them because they were going to be killed by the Khan's men. And then he was like, no, just let them go in the desert. They'll die in the desert. Which, you know, maybe at least it's a chance. And so we don't know how they're going to paint it, because they didn't like the commander by the end either. And we should mention too, one of the other soldiers is played by Stephen Baldwin in a very interesting role. He plays the sort of seemingly greenhorn soldier who gets injured early on and does the whining. He does an okay job, but his part is relatively minor. If you weren't familiar with Stephen Baldwin's face or didn't pay attention to the credits, I don't think you would know that it was him. Mandy, what was your take on the ending?
Oh, like, some of the stuff Greg said, like, is, like, you know, nice to wrap up the end of the movie with the protagonist, like, going home, sort of. But it didn't feel super satisfying, because the whole movie was very ambiguous or very open about what was happening in this war. There were no good guys and bad guys, really. I mean, there's definitely some troubled characters that you were not unhappy to see meet their fate at the end.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't particularly satisfying. It had me thinking back to, like, our high school English classes, and I was wondering if one of our specific English teachers would have painted him as a twisted Christ figure, where he was having, like, his re-rising after several days away from one life, like a certain kind of death, and then wandering in the desert, and then, like, kind of going off, being reborn.
Because the imagery is there, right? He's crucified on a rock. Yeah.
Right. And then he's found by these other set of people, and yeah. And I was just like, oh, she would have loved to have told that story and taught that lesson from this. And I was never a big fan of that, but I did think about that when, like, this particular Christian imagery was used in this film.
Well, and I also thought it was fascinating because the Afghanis, when they're following the tank, and it's not easy for them. Like obviously, the people in the tank are like, I don't know how they're surviving. It's impossible out here, but they're doing it. But it's clearly not easy. And they come across a holy man who's dancing around a fire, talking in what seem to be riddles. And then you realize, because he's talking about Goliath being slain by David and the Khan coming through the desert. Oh, it's David. You're going to slay the Goliath. And like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he's like, Goliath. And he points and there's the tank tracks. And they're like, oh, it's a good sign, maybe. And they go, and then here's the thing. If I were Kovalchenko and this whole sequence of events occurred and I knew it, I would convert to Islam, because you're like, this seems prophetic, right? Because he's like, you're going to, David will slay Goliath with a stone. And then of course it's the women actually using C4 and grenades that blow up a rock ridge over the bottleneck where the tank has to exit the canyon. And that's what eventually disables the tank. And it's literally the stone, not the rockets. The rocket doesn't work. It destroys their barrel of their tank, and they've already run out of shells. It literally is an impotent weapon. But the rock is what does it. And it's super, there's all sorts of imagery there. But I thought that was, I don't think that this film sets out or succeeds at being pro-religion in any sense. I think that it it eschews all organization, because it's like, look, this country's shit. The Afghanis are not doing well either, and the religion seems like grasping at straws. It's a very unpleasant. There's so much. My favorite scene in this is that sort of like black irony, which is the tank while trying to lose the rebels, they come across an oasis with water, and knowing that the rebels will use the water, they get their water, they get it for the tank, and then they poison the water. Well, the rebels, one rebel dies, but they figure it out before anybody else drinks the water. Well, of course, the rebels know this and the soldiers don't. The canyon has no outlet. So they have to eventually turn around and come back the way they came. Well, at their apex, when they've gone as far as they can, when they realize they have to turn around, they think everything is great because a copter comes and offers to rescue them. The commander says, no, we're taking the tank back. They get fuel from the copter, and the copter, which is looking for water, says, all right, well, we'll radio ahead and get you some more fuel. We're out of here. Well, when the tank finally backtracks and gets to that watering hole, all the copter crew is dead because they found that poisoned water supply. So they essentially killed a unit of their own men, and also they don't know, it turns out they probably did, but they don't know if they radioed in for help yet before they were killed. So it's really this karmic payback, right? But it feels like an aha moment, but it's not a rewarding moment for the viewer. It's not the sort of gratification moment, like the reveal and capture. It's not the Scooby-Doo moment where they pull the mask off and you're like, aha. It's just a bleak, how could things get worse all across the board? And that sort of oppressive, it's like the sun in this film, right? The nights are black and the daytime is blinding. And it's these harsh contrasts that make the film seem so oppressive, and I think really accentuate these moments where the characters sometimes don't even say anything. They just look. Like, they don't say, like, I can't believe it, we killed our own men. They just look at the dead bodies and are like, fuck, And I thought that was a great moment in this film. I don't know. We're about wrapped up on The Beast. It's a dark movie. I think it's a great movie. I think that there's just so many elements to discuss that there are probably some, we didn't even really touch much on the gender divide between the Afghani women and the Afghani men. I don't think that the movie touched a huge amount on it, but it does give the women sort of a power that their male counterparts are not willing to grant them. They constantly are telling them to get out. This is not your job. And of course, they're eventually the ones that do the job that the men fail to do. Thought that was interesting. But to conclude this, Mandy, would you recommend The Beast, aka The Beast of War, to someone, and why?
I think I would recommend it to, I don't know, like people that like stage stuff. I think I'm gonna go and look for this, like if there's a recording of the stage show of this, I think I'd like to see it in that format. It is a slow, difficult movie to watch. It has very 80s soundtrack, which drove me kind of crazy, but did help to heighten the tension of the film. So I don't know. I guess as usual, like to those who listen to this podcast, you're probably already fans of odd movies from the 80s. So this is right up your alley.
All right, Greg Johnson, who would you recommend The Beast of War to and why?
I would recommend it to pretty much anyone. I mean, it's a great war movie that does something different. I mean, I'd recommend it if you like something a little more heady. Hell, I'd recommend it if you watched 12 Strong or whatever that Chris Hemsworth one was, where they rode around on horses.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a good war movie. It's something different. I would, though, add an asterisk to that. Something that we didn't touch on, I think, is it is ultimately a white savior film. It's like Lawrence of Arabia. It's like Last of the Mohicans. It's like The Last Samurai. It's, even though they're not Americans, it's a bunch of white people coming into a country they know nothing about and somehow using their culture to their advantage and understanding them better than they understand themselves. So take the movie with a grain of salt, but it's still a good film. But that's a pretty glaring thing in my mind.
I think that that's really important to point. I'm glad you brought it up, because I actually, if I could reimagine or change one thing about this film, I would like to see how it would play out with Kovalchenko staying with the tank crew the entire time and not sort of flipping sides. Because while he does have that sort of Christ figure component, and that's what it plays on, the idea of really seeing at both ends the Khan and Kovalchenko eventually meet as opposite figures, even though they're both potentially figures of purity in a way, right? Kovalchenko is sort of the reborn prophet, disciple figure, and Khan is sort of the righteous avenger. Seeing them come to head that way, as opposed to flipping Kovalchenko, which is what we want from sort of a pure moment, because we're like, oh, you're a good person, don't do this. But if we didn't see that, I think you could come out with something that was maybe even more honest. But that said, I did really enjoy this movie, and I think that I can only assume that it's distasteful to a palate for a lot of people who really want to believe that war is always a positive if we're the ones that are fighting it. I think that's why it's probably not more well known, because I think that it's better than a great many films that are much better known from this year, let alone this era. And I also want to mention, we didn't really touch on it, the gunner is played by Don Harvey, who's a very well-known actor. You'd recognize him if you saw him. He's Jeff in Better Call Saul. He was in Casualties of War with Michael J. Fox. He's been around. And then also the Khan is played by Stephen Bauer, who is Manny in Scarface, and he's in Ray Donovan as Avi. So he's also well known, and he did a pretty good job. I would recommend this film to people who like impressive sort of AAA big budget films. I don't think this is truly a big budget film, but if you do like movies, especially war movies like Black Hawk Down, or some of these more mainstream war films that are more focused on plot and maybe some history as opposed to characters, watch this movie, because I think this is a really perfect marriage between the two things. It takes a very interesting microcosm moment in time for the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and it pairs it with really great character work that kind of tries to get at this, the heart of the human condition kind of thing. And I think it succeeds in a lot of ways. So I think it's a film you'll be thinking about long after you watch it. So I recommend it to people looking for that. If you're looking for something light, you won't find it with The Beast of War. All right, so next up, we have a film that is truly the sister film to The Beast. Maybe kidding, we'll find out. We've got TROMA'S WAR from 1988. Okay, guys, so TROMA'S WAR. Now, for those listeners, I think most of listeners to the Occult and Classic podcast will probably know what Troma is. Troma is the longest running independent film company, and their biggest hit claim to fame is The Toxic Avenger from the 80s. Now, full disclosure, I volunteered for Troma, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago as the Toxic Avenger at the Rock and Shock convention in Massachusetts, and they're fun and they operate on the cheap, and I love them. And their entire shtick, and it is a shtick, is releasing really bizarre films and producing films that are both highly entertaining and extremely, extremely classless and tasteless. And I think this film, I mean, it's clearly a Troma production. I think it meets a lot of those things. We're going to talk about it. I don't know, how familiar were you guys with Troma before this? Mandy, did you know anything about Troma?
No, I didn't. Nothing.
Okay. Troma, Greg, did you know anything about Troma heading in?
No, but since I knew that this was your pick, I was expecting some shit, and I definitely got it.
Yeah, in fact, I think the only thing we don't see in this movie is actual shit. And it's, so here's the plot rundown, and there's a lot of little bits and pieces that are going to be lost in this, but essentially a plane load of American citizens crashes after both their engines fail on an island that turns out to be Cuban territory, where a group of crazy mix of people are running a terrorist training cell, and that next morning they're shipping off, it looks like 12, 15 people who are dressed as Americans to the States to systematically sow chaos so that the right-wing government officials in the United States can use it as an excuse to put their right-wing, more of their right-wing puppets into high office in the United States. So it's this sort of weird neoconservatives using joining Russians who are using a terrorist cell mixed with all races, ethnicities, and different things of terrorism to perpetuate a conservative agenda. Very strange. But as we know that the film starts with a plane crash and a bunch of survivors, it is, in fact, the pilot to the Lost television show. And that's, of course, not true, but it's very much like that. We open...
I was picking up a huge amount of Lost vibes at the beginning of this movie.
I mean, I'm not... It's like a joke, but it's not. Like,
it's not.
Those of us who remember Lost, like, it opens with a plane crash and survivors collecting themselves and then trying to discover the island. That is literally the beginning of this film, like, to a T.
And then they come across the others. Like, it's literally... It's like the whole first season of Lost in, like, 30 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, we watched the extended complete edition, which I think most DVD copies and Blu-ray copies now are the complete edition. It's about 10 to 13 minutes, depending on your territory, longer than the original 80s cuts that came out. The things that they cut out originally were a couple of gore moments and I think a rape scene. And for those, I mean, rape is one of those things on film that is just so uncomfortable, just like in real life. It's a really traumatic, terrible thing, and it can certainly trigger many of us. But I will say this is not a serious film, so it was hard. It's with any Troma movie, I did not find myself taking anything particularly seriously, even the horrible atrocities visited upon people, both soldiers and castaways in Troma's War, and there are many of them. In addition to sort of nothing being disavowed by Troma as far as like they will do anything. They will have murder, rape, pillaging. Toxic Avenger is famous for having a scene where it's one of the best scenes in cult cinema history where a bunch of punks hit a kid on a bicycle and then back over his head, and it shows his head being crushed. And then one of the guys says, "Hey, you want to go whatever?" And the other guy goes, "No, I got church in the morning." Like, that's the level of Troma's ability to be like, we're going to show you things that make you uncomfortable and we're going to make a joke about it. Troma's War has that, but I do not think that it is as offensive as some of their other films. In fact, I'd hazard to say this is a movie you could probably show someone who isn't familiar with Toxic Avenger and and they would be able to make it to the end. But it is a long ass cut. It's an hour and 44 minutes. It's only 5 minutes shorter than The Beast, and The Beast has a lot more subtext to cram in.
And see that I felt the exact opposite. Like the overabundance of, again, like rape and gore, like it's like any comedian who's like, oh well, I grabbed the third rail, like it was all for the sake of comedy. If it's funny, sure, but none of this was funny.
No,
like,
it's not.
Like it was just fucking mean spirited and just tasteless to be tasteless.
And Mandy, what was your vibe on that?
Oh wow! Like I mean, I don't even know what to say. Really, it's just it was a bad movie.
So,
which is what we were promised.
Well, what's funny? So I'll cut you off on this one thing is,
yeah.
You touched on the mean spiritedness, Greg, and I would say maybe it's because I've seen some films that I truly consider really mean spirited, especially towards women, where I think there's one in particular which the name will come to me, and then will be wiped clear from my memory once again. But it's one of the clown movies. It's not Clowntergeist. It's not that one. It's another direct-to-video clown film where I was like, this is a vile movie because they clearly do not understand that they are crossing a line. Whereas Troma, it definitely is a shock jock film. I
felt that it was just like goofy, more than mean-spirited. I felt like they knew that everything that they were doing, like very tongue-in-cheek, like we know we're being sexist. So we're gonna like really go all the way. Like we know that this is like
they do.
gory, ridiculous, like murder, war scenes or whatever. But like we're gonna make it like I don't know if it's a low budget aspect of it or if they like intentionally make stuff look goofy. But like that's how it came off to me. This was all just like campy for the sake of camp. And like dialing it up to 11 just to be extra tongue-in-cheek and like kind of make their point that they know that they're doing it. But it was still like just bad. Like it was just not my kind of movie. So it's still just like, yeah, I see what you're doing. Like that's okay. Whatever. Like, what's the next plot point? Is that gonna happen like anytime?
I figure we're all kind of thinking about the middle of the film where they capture them and they line them all up and like it's just kind of going down the line like, okay, you're gonna get raped. Okay, next person. Okay, you're gonna get raped. Okay, third person, you're also gonna get raped. And then you get to the men and it's like shoot one in the head, beat out of this one. Like it's all these like different things happening to them, but all the women, they're just like like throw them into a tent with some underling or
maybe McRaperson. Like,
it's like the most problematic part of this film and the only really famous scene that I can think of, and it's really the concept that's famous, not the scene, is the terrorist AIDS brigade, and that is by far the most insane, completely off color, offensive thing. And I don't know who you have. I mean, even if you are someone who enjoys the high level of sophomore humor that Troma is putting out in this film, you have to be, unless you're crazy, you will acknowledge that this is really inappropriate in any setting. But they know that and they went with it. And the scene is, I forget what he's named, but it's something like, Tommy AIDS. And
it's Mr. AIDS.
Mr. AIDS.
It is Mr.
AIDS. And he is pretending to be a Frenchman in a white suit with a hat who is picking a woman to have sex with and infect with AIDS. And he does that, and she does get her revenge by shooting him in the dick with a crossbow before herself getting shot. I don't think that that's really a full turnaround. He tries to say with this really bad French accent, I was following orders. And take from it what you will. It is the weirdest, and that's the thing. This movie has an insane number of weird moments. And that is the thing I like about this movie. For example, the pig guy, I mean, there's several heads of the terrorist organization, different people in charge, and one of them is a character who is a pig. I mean, I don't even like, he's like a man pig, like he's a person, and they gave him a prosthetic nose that could be real on somebody, but we know it's fake because he constantly is showing his nostrils and snorting. And let's just listen to a clip of him. And truly, this actor, his name will come back to me, is doing God's work. Here we go.
Want to risk our infiltration trainees who have spent years to train?
Yes! Calls the entire economy and all the plans we've been making for it all these long years is at risk as long as even one of those commandos still lives.
Yeah. So it's Rick Collins, I believe.
Could I just say real quick
Yes.
about Rick Collins and the entire cast? Like, man, I've never seen a group of individuals in a worse movie commit this fucking hard.
I know. Yes.
Like, I think I only saw one person like clearly break, who clearly was not an actor, but everyone else they were 110% on board with their dialogue.
Yeah, really though. And so Troma in this film, as they do with many films, casts a huge number of non-actors. But they also pull a lot of people who are actors or want to be actors from New York, typically. So they get a lot of people's first chance. In fact, you could find a lot of working actors who early on worked in Troma films and went on to great things. And in fact, Rick Collins, who we just mentioned, who is super jacked in this role, he's actually in many of Troma's most famous films. He's got a bit part in The Toxic Avenger, and then he's in Return to Nukem High and Toxic Avenger Part 2 and 3. And for those who think that Troma is just a throwaway kind of thing, I'm not saying that you're not wrong in many cases, but I will say that James Gunn, who is a very, in my opinion, one of the best working directors right now. He's directed the new Suicide Squad film that's coming out. He's most famous for the Guardians of the Galaxy series, and will be working on the third. And he also did the live action Scooby-Doo 1 and 2. So, I mean, he's done large movies, and I think many people love him dearly. He came from Troma. So they do put out true talent. And I think what you're saying with the commitment is people seem to like working for Troma. I know I did, even though they definitely work on the cheap. I got paid in DVDs. I did not get money. But for a weirdo like me, I was just going to spend it on him anyway. But Rick Collins snorting, I wanted him in this whole movie, and then I wanted a spin-off. I don't know what kind of weird backwoods, like white supremacist redneck he's supposed to be. He's shirtless with a bondage like brace and then like strips of machine gun bullets that he doesn't use. I don't understand his character. I don't know where he came from. But there's also a bunch of other characters that just run on screen just to get killed that I don't understand. There is a ninja in a full like Party City ninja outfit in the group of terrorists at one point. There's one scene where Parker, who is one of the main characters, he's played by Rick Washburn, who's done a lot of good work and 100% committed to this film. I mean, 100%. He plays the used car salesman who is not only an ugly American bigot, but he was in the airborne in Nam. And so he's like their secret weapon, and he starts killing these terrorists and collecting their ears. And he is all over this movie. He commits 100%. And at one point, he's shooting people, and then a terrorist wearing like a rope thong covered in mud from head to toe, just top to mud, just runs in to attack him. Like, that's just, that wasn't, I can't imagine that's scripted. That's just a weird character that just happens to be in here. And
it's definitely the lineup from Blazing Saddles when they invite all the evil people, and you see like Klansmen, you see Nazis, you see Banditos, like the whole shebang.
Yes. Well, and that brings something else about that. Lloyd Kaufman, who is head of Trauma, and Michael Hertz as well. Both of them are credited with directing this film and writing it. With some other, Lloyd Kaufman did the story, and then some other people actually wrote it, including additional dialogue by several of the actors, including with Rick Washburn. Is people often, I mean, there have been people who have railed against Troma for all of the crazy, disgusting things they put on camera. The thing that shocks me that people seem to ignore in many cases is, of course, they know what they're doing. They're smart enough to run a business, so that's been around for many years, so they know what they're doing and they're aware of it. But also, this is the most diverse cast of people. Every race, color, creed are in this film, and there are a lot of extras in this film that get great FaceTime. And they're everywhere. And they're the character who plays the Christian minister that the neo-Nazi keeps calling a Jew is a person of color. I think it's Nancy is one of the punk rock girls. She's black and she's called the smart one throughout the film. Who, by the way, I don't have 100% confirmation on this. That's Alita Harris, who plays that very beautiful actress. She has the honor of slicing the conjoined twins in half, who apparently are somehow running this, although they die halfway through the movie. They're connected
at the head.
They're joined at the
too.
head.
Like, they're the brains of the operation. They have, like,
I'm like, yeah, and I'm like, is that supposed to be a joke? I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
But again, those are just more weird characters. Like, they throw shit, just anything could happen in this. If it's the same person, and I really think it is, but I have not been able to get confirmation, she is now a doctor and a reverend and a motivational speaker. So that's pretty interesting. I would, Alita, if you're listening, please come on the pod. I would love to hear what you have to say about Troma's War and everything else. But yeah, so there's just a lot of insanity in this movie. It also is distinctly separated into like three. I mean, they're not arcs because they don't really flow together, but they're three separate films in a way, right? In the beginning, we have a group of people learning to work together like any sort of motley crew stranded on an island scenario, right? Like, it's that lost moment. They're all stuck. They realize that they're a terrorist, and they all start to work together and find each other's strengths. Then there's the middle of the movie, which is like a solid 40 minutes of them attacking them getting captured, and then being rescued / demolishing this like second base of the terrorists. Then we find out they discover the actual plan, which is the terrorists are, like I said, they're going to send like 12 people on a little boat into Florida who are somehow going to destroy America. I'm not sure how that plan would have worked out. I'm pretty sure they would have got to Florida and they all would have caught an STD and died. Like,
is that what we're living through right now, though, Nate? Are you sure this movie didn't really happen?
Oh, it's a history. It's a history. Disappearing ballots. Yeah, no, so... Fair. But anyway, so then they realize that they have to go and save America by destroying this other base where Snorty McPigman is. And that's the third part of the movie, is their siege on this. I really liked the moment where one of the characters, because the terrorists are convinced that this is a cell of American elite commandos who are faking it, that they're just random civilians. And so they're constantly saying, where are the commandos? And the logic is that no normal people could kill that many of their men. Well, their men that have supposedly been trained, some of whom potentially from birth to be soldiers, are absolutely redonkulously incompetent and incapable of anything. Like, they just run into machine gun fire like you were like a fat kid in a 100-degree day running through sprinklers. Like, and I was that fat kid, so I can say it. They're just so... And it's just mad melee. Like, I pulled clips from this film for us to listen to, but most of the film is screaming explosions and machine gun fire which does not translate well to an audio-only medium.
And crying babies.
And crying babies. And there is a baby in this film which does survive to the end, which I was a little surprised about, because Troma really could have thrown a wrench in there and said, just kidding. I do want to say that I enjoy that the baby is credited. It's Lisbeth Kaufman, I assume related to Lloyd Kaufman, credited as the jingoistic baby. I don't know why. I'm not sure. But I enjoyed.
Because
I enjoyed that moment. And as always, I looked through some reviews, critical and civilian reviews, so to speak, of these movies. And one that caught my eye was somebody saying this movie was ruined by gore and bloodshed because it could have been a really great action comedy. I don't want to know that person in real life, and here's why. The comedy in this movie would be even more insane if it wasn't covered in blood and body fluid, I think. Because you've got scenes like, well, first off, after they're rescued, the survivors are rescued from that base in the middle of the movie, there's a scene where essentially all of the surviving people, except the older gentleman and the older lady, and I guess a Spanish lady, the accents are horrendous, I can't tell. They all hook up before they go to the final battle. The newly blind woman hooks up with the overweight nice guy, older gentleman. The misogynistic hot guy hooks up with who we're told is supposed to be an attractive woman. She's not hideous. She's 80s attractive. I don't know. I don't get that whole feathered hair thing. And then who else hooks up? I forget. There is another group. But anyway, so they all have a hookup before they go to the final battle, which is kind of funny. There is nudity in this film. There's several times, several women are topless in this. Like any Troma movie, I think it's hard to find titillation in this film. It's not, and not because it's bloody or because it's misogynistic or because it's got AIDS humor, which is just so tough to swallow. It's just goofy. It's like if a beautiful woman in full clown realness with a bozo wig and parachute pants ran out into the street in front of you and took her top off. I don't know maybe that's somebody's kink, but that is not a normal thing that's going to turn someone on. And that's what nudity is like in a Troma film. So I appreciate that it's there for the sake of selling it and getting it on a shelf at a Blockbuster. But I don't think that's a selling point for most people in this case. I don't know how anybody else felt about that.
None of it was sexy.
None of it exactly got me excited.
Yeah, and it's not really, it's gratuitous by virtue of the fact that it's there. It doesn't really, we've got the humor, I was getting to the humor scenes. There's this scene where because there are terrorists who are men and women, which I thought was a nice touch. Like everyone really is included in this. And this woman attacks Parker, and she's in she has large fake breasts, and he pushes her away and her shirt rips open, and then she's on her back and he goes over to kill her and cut off her ear as he's done with others, and then he's like, with a pair like that I'll let you keep them. And he turns around, and then if she of course grabs a gun and goes to shoot him, and she's shot in the back by one of the other heroines, and she's shot in the back through her breast, and we hear a deflation sound before she hits the ground. And there are straight up cartoon sound effects in this movie, right? During really inappropriate moments, which is very Troma of them. Like a neo-Nazi will hit someone and you'll get a boing, it's totally out there.
And doesn't someone fart in a tree and that's how they're revealed?
That's how they're given away.
Yeah.
And it's not like we just saw the guy eat a burrito. He just happens to be in a tree in a paintball mask and farts. And it's just these gags. My favorite insane gag is when the hot girl and the misogynist guy are they've already consummated their relationship, and now they're fighting the final battle, and they go back to back, and then he's like, I told you to stay behind. And he kisses her on the cheek. He's like, I'm so glad you never listened to me. And then she turns to him, and they both have submachine guns. And she rubs the muzzle of her machine gun against the muzzle of his machine gun. like you're rubbing chopsticks together, and they close up on it, and I'm like, I'm not exactly sure what this is supposed to symbolize.
That wasn't titillating for you. That didn't.
I'm like, I didn't get it, and but it was so, like, the fact that that moment was committed to film was, it really did inspire me, because one thing they did in this movie is, I don't think Troma does this in general. I don't think they fail to catch their vision on film. I think that what they do is they're like, well, I want this, so I'm going to do it. And that's not everybody's cup of tea. I'm gonna be honest and say it's rarely my cup of tea. And there's a lot of stuff that a lot of filmmakers put in things that I'm like, you should have cut that. Some editor did not do their job. And this movie, it's all of those put together. I don't know if this is one of them, but Troma, as I said, they often do things on the cheap. And when they shoot on film, they would go and buy the tails from other production companies. And the tails were the ends of film reels that weren't shot on. They cut them off, and they would buy that, and they would splice them all together, and they'd shoot on that. And I imagine this is probably the case with this movie, because the color is wildly different in many shots, especially in the middle somewhere. They're shooting soldiers in the trees. That's like the farting tree scene. And when they show the tree shots, it's not just that they're staring at a bright sky. The colors are radically different. So I'm sure it's a different film stock, which happened. And so the mastering is all over the place. And that does add a flavor that's like, oh, this movie came out the same year as The Beast. These films were in production at the same time. And they are so unbelievably different that I think they both have a place in the world. But I don't know. To me, this movie would be great at a drive-in with all of you with me in the car. Whereas if I brought all of us to go see The Beast in the theater, dinner afterward might be a much more somber affair. And I guess, I don't know. It makes me wonder, which movie is more to our times right now? Like, if one of these films was to come out today, made, which do you think it would be? I know what I think, but Greg, if you were producing a movie, which of these do you think would get made?
The one that ends with the entire cast looking at the camera and loudly cheering America, maybe?
Yes, that literally happened. Stay till after the credits, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Mandy, what do you think?
Well, I think that all of this is a huge conspiracy, and believers of QAnon actually made TROMA'S War, like, within the last 6 months.
Well, I'm pretty sure that Troma will be putting out QAnon zombie corona attack in the future. Yes. And yeah, no, what's interesting too, and let's listen to this clip, because I described the right-winger conspiracy that's part of this movie. And let's listen to this. This is the hunky lead here, who I believe is Sean Bowen. Yeah, Sean Bowen. And this is his only credit, at least his only credit on IMDb. I'm not sure if he works in stage or if he's moved on to other career choices, but this is him talking to the other people as he's found a stash of information from the terrorists.
It seems they're planning a massive infiltration of the United States, coast to coast, New York to LA. They're out to kill as many people as they can and freak out the rest of the country in the process. And the best news of all is, they're leaving tomorrow at dawn.
So the commies got the terrorists doing their dirty work now. We better pick up this hardware, people. We're gonna need it.
It's a little more complicated than that. There were papers in there with American names on it. People with influence and contacts in Washington. And from what I can see, they're the ones at the top pulling the strings.
But wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Why would right-wing Americans be working with Cubans and terrorists? They're left-wing.
Okay, there were political papers there, written by Americans, using the terrorists to accomplish their own selfish goals.
What goals?
The usual ones. Money, greed. They want the terrorists to destabilize the country, then they're going to blame it all on the communists. That way they can get more and more right-wingers running things in Washington.
So Here's where my ears started to tingle when I was watching this scene, because it's a really weird scene in this movie, because all of a sudden we're getting exposition that gets a little more serious. I mean, it's still not serious, but it gets a little more serious than the rest of the movie. And having followed Troma for many years, I know that Lloyd Kaufman, he was a strong supporter of Ralph Nader, sort of third-party politics, a liberal, obviously, based on being a content creator. And there's a part of me as a white middle-class 18-year-old cisgendered man who was comfortable growing up and always thought, this is a little out there, right? Like a little wackadoo maybe. Ralph Nader's, he's not wacky. He's right in many cases. Seatbelts are great. But he's a little left than even I need to be. And now in our political climate, QAnon is crazy. They're full of shit. If you don't believe that and you're listening to this podcast, you don't have to listen to this podcast. You can go somewhere else. There's plenty of other shit you can listen to. But there really are people working against democratic process, things like that. And they tend to be people who have money. And seeing things like this that came out 4 years after I was born, and realizing that a lot of things still don't change that quickly. It's a weird feeling. It's just a very strange thing to be watching a movie that is essentially an R-rated cartoon, and then go, by the way, your political system is really fucked up. And then kaboom, boom, you know, like it was just really weird. And I don't know if that ever worked to the advantage of making people aware of it, or if it somehow cheapens the message. I don't know. But I really liked that moment when Parker, Vietnam vet, anyone who can't kill a man is a pinko and clearly queer, his words, not mine. Like that's having him go, I don't believe it. And then the lead going, yeah, well, it's true. There are Americans on this list. That totally surprised me. And it surprised me that made the cut when really the rest of the movie is just gunshots, explosions, screeches, boobs, and fart noises.
I mean, I thought it cheapened it. I mean, it was kind of every other word out of anyone else's mouth was utter absurdity. So to have anything even like orbiting poignant, I just kind of tuned out, honestly. I was like, oh, more bullshit and it's not a joke. So I guess I'll come back when there's something that maybe I can try and laugh at.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I didn't laugh at anything in this film. There were a couple of times I smirked though, and there were tons of times when my jaw dropped open. And sometimes that's worth it, because if nothing else, this is definitely a movie that someone can come to you and say, man, Cats was insanely bad. I've never seen a movie that bad. You can go, are you fucking kidding me? Let me show you something. Sit down here, son. Sit down here. This was my Vietnam. And then show them Troma's War. And again, I think that there's a lot of people like it. Now, something else we need to touch on. Troma's kind of known for their low budget gore effects. They're all over the place in this movie. And as I always believe, they're effective. I like their gore effects. They're goofy, they're latex, but they're low budget, but they're super creative. And if you're going to show me, if you're going to show me cartoony violence, I want to see a severed arm. I want to see twins connected at the head, cut in half on the floor. Like, I want to see that stuff.
I love the snake attack.
The snake attack. So one of the characters in the beginning from the plane crash, he never gains coherence. He's just always wounded and bleeding, and they're carrying him around. Well, he ends up getting bitten by a snake, and it's a real snake that then becomes a rubber snake on his face, which I appreciate because no animals need to die for any movie we've ever reviewed, and a couple people maybe, but that's okay. And then this throws us the rubber snake, and then we get this great effect of his face just pulsates around his eye, it just like a beating heart. And I'm always like, is it gonna explode? It doesn't explode, but it's gruesome. And the work of those air pockets that they put in under latex. I mean, Troma's a master at that. It works. It's not Videodrome, but it's icky. And the same with
and hilarious, but
and
it doesn't make you
hilarious.
laugh. Like all at the same time.
It's now. So here's the thing: the other, to me, a great comedy war movie is Tropic Thunder. I really love Tropic Thunder. I'm a huge Ben Stiller fan of his writing and his acting, and I think that was a brilliant movie because it pushed buttons, but it was still tolerable to the mainstream audience, even though if you break it down or you take it out of context, it is truly out there. This movie, I do feel like in a way is a progenitor of that because it did attempt to use that same jungle warfare concept that was so big in the 70s and 80s, especially the 80s with Rambo, really Rambo 2, 3, etc. It used those to comedic effect. Tropic Thunder has some true laugh moments. Troma's War is more of, I'm trying to think of the right term. I think John Waters used the term on RuPaul's Drag Race once, a beautiful obscenity. That's what this movie is to me. It is, whereas a film like Terror Vision has really interesting characters and it's clearly a satire, this is not, it doesn't feel like a satire. It feels like an homage that they decided to throw in a blender with a bad 80s sex romp. And somehow the jokes got melded. And I think it doesn't, it may not work on the level that it's a successful film, but I do think it stands unique in this way. And I think that's why, because the movie's also known as War, just War.
Isn't it also known as 1,000 Ways to Die?
Yep, it was released in the U.S. as well as 1,000 Ways to Die. And
which I was actually thinking about the title, and maybe I went into the movie the wrong way. And when I look at Troma's War, which Troma's, it has an apostrophe. It is possessive.
Yes.
So it's Troma Entertainment's production of war.
Yeah. Yes.
And maybe I should have gone into it thinking in the same way, like not another teen movie where it's kind of Troma presents a portrayal of war, and it's not going to be accurate, and you should know that because it's Troma Entertainment.
That's a very good point, because I personally, and maybe it's because I'm just a sick person, but I much would watch Troma's War over any Not Another Teen movie flick or scary movie flick or etc. I'll watch Repossessed, but we'll go Leslie Nielsen's a different story. Yes, I think that's an accurate portrayal. And for fans of Troma, Troma does have like this interconnected universe where a lot of the movies take place in Tromaville. And there's Tromaville High, things like that. And this movie works in that universe. Many of the people are from Tromaville. And so it's kind of a nice side story to their Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD, which of course takes place in New York, but it has connections. Toxic Avenger, which takes place in Tromaville. Here's an interesting story that people who know Troma might find interesting. When I did volunteer, I was the Toxic Avenger. The mask is very tight, at least the one we had. And they didn't have T-shirts for me, but they wanted me to be branded so people wouldn't think that I was just a fan who bought a Toxic Avenger mask or something, the Toxic Avenger. But they did have a lot of Tromaville High bumper stickers. So what they did is they had me turn my own shirt inside out, which was black, and then put a Tromaville High sticker on my front and back, and then made me bracelets and I think even anklets from the Tromaville bumper stickers for me to wear throughout. And that's how people, and I had a mop that was of course a real mop. And that is how people knew that I was with Troma as I wandered throughout the convention. And a surprising number of celebrities wanted pictures with me, which is funny because to me, I'm like, Sid Haig, God rest his soul at this point, but Sid Haig has a picture with me that he wanted taken as Toxic Avenger, and he never will know that that was just some schmuck from New Hampshire at the time in that sweating in that Toxic Avenger mask. Side story. But yeah, I agree. The branding of Troma's War is very accurate. And if you just called it War, which I think maybe was the initial intent, sort of like a 1942 or a, as you said, a Blazing Saddles. Like, I think they kind of sometimes go for like a Mel Brooks vibe of ridiculous goofball comedy. I don't think it's as accurate, and it doesn't work as well because Troma's War, which is the re-release branding, is accurate. It is distinctly a trauma film. And yeah, I think that does put you in the mood if you know what what traumas apostrophe S really means. Mandy, how do you feel about the branding of this film? Because when you go into a film called War, as you said, there's not actually a particular war. I think of World War II, I think of large-scale conflicts. This is really like an insurgency at best.
Yeah, and like at the end they say like it was a war, like weird snort. I'm like, it's like a battle, like maybe a skirmish. I don't know where you draw the line there, but I'm like, didn't feel like a war. It definitely just felt like the pilot for Lost. So it, you know, to bring that up again, I was like, I don't understand why this got named this, and I don't know the history of trauma, which thankfully you've filled us all in on through this episode. But it was just, yeah, I was like, I don't know. It's just some campy 80s stuff. I'm here for it. It was great.
So it's interesting that, and I'm sure we will, there are so many trauma gems that we can talk about at some point, but getting to there's an overlaying of I do think there's an overlaying of satire in this film where it makes fun of 80s action movie shtick, right? The hot guy who rescues the girl from the ocean at the beginning, and she's like, "What are you doing? Why am I topless? Are you copying a feel?" Essentially, and he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about, lady. I rescued you from the water. I can't. There's a plane crash in case you didn't notice." And she's like, still mean. And then his response isn't, "Look, sorry, geez," which it would be probably now in a script. It's whatever, sweet cheeks, like blah blah blah. Maybe you'll feel different later. Like that whole shtick, and yet he's the hero, right? And then she saves his butt, and he's like, "I'm so glad you are, you know, basically a raging bitch." And it's a weird thing. But the movie, so it sounds sexist, and it is sexist in some ways, but it also has a huge number of women in the cast.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I mean, I was gonna say at some point I remembered that the women do save all the men.
Yeah,
that's the end of the film.
And they do, and not only do they save the men, they're actually like pretty badass at the end, right? Like, and let's give a shout out to the mom of the baby who knows like martial arts and kills like many people. At one point, before she's found her stolen baby again, she strangles an attacker with her baby's onesie and then shoves it in his mouth and beats him to death. Like, and then takes the onesie back. And
she like puts it over her shoulder.
Like a bird cloth.
Oh, mom move.
Yes,
right there.
yes. That was, she was far and away my favorite character. And we also, and so the women in the movie, and like I said, the character of Nancy is a young black girl who, they even mention this, she starts crying, you know, in the beginning crying and being upset, and then at the end, she sort of goes on her own to kill the mastermind of this, and she's called the smart one. We don't know why she's called the smart one, to be honest. I'm not sure where they got that, but it is really nice to see a person of color in a movie, especially from the 80s, being called smart. That is great, and I feel like this might be the only one that stars white people where they call a black person smart, and that's sad. That's really sad. But Troma put it over in the entirety of Hollywood. Troma said, "Well, we're going to do it," and I thought that was nice. And like I said, especially if you look at and the Beast, of course, they have people who are trying to be, there's the Caucasian group of Russians, and there's the Middle Eastern group of Afghanis, or people playing Middle Eastern. And so that's maybe not a great example, but in most American action films in the 80s, which is a change from the 70s, it's white people. That's what we see. And the amount of representation is terrible. It's piss poor. If you do see black people in most 80s action movies, which is a genre I love, but they're usually gang members. And it's a generalization, and it's sad that was the case. And it's bled into the 2000s. I mean, there's a lot of whitewashing still, and we're well aware of it. And hopefully it is changing, but it's going to take time. And this movie, again, heroes, villains, everyone is of color and white, and there's I believe some Asian cast members. There are, in fact, and it's just and men and women, and they're all kicking ass. They're all getting killed. It truly is equal opportunity garbage, and that is a really nice thing to see, especially in 1988, because in the 70s we did get a nice mix of people. Grindhouse, I feel, was really a great thing for getting people of color on screen and some leading roles as well. And then we took this huge backswing in Reagan's 80s. And you know, that's unfortunately what happened. But it was nice to see that. So we're going to get to the end here on with our time for TROMA'S War. Mandy, would you recommend TROMA'S War to anyone? And if so, who and why?
I don't know. Did you like Lost? Would you like to revisit that in some bizarre, previous, possibly current, future, I don't even know, time warp event? Like, go ahead and watch TROMA'S War. You're probably not going to laugh, but you'll be amused. And there's an adorable baby.
True, the baby's cute. Greg, who would you recommend TROMA'S War to and why?
Well, if you heard us talking about the Beast and you're like, man, this is all really over my head and just a lot of neoliberal garbage. Where's the good shit? I'd consider TROMA'S War a perfect fit for you.
Oh, Lloyd Kaufman is rolling in his grave, but also opening his wallet. So yeah, I think that you both are on something. I think TROMA'S War is very watchable, if over long, because
overlong.
So it's 140, or it's an hour and 44 minutes, not 144, thank God, but an hour and 44 minutes. So it's only 5 minutes shorter than The Beast. But I will say there is no shortage of things happening. There were a lot, especially if you're a fan of low budget gore effects that are a lot better than the true no budget gore effects we often see on direct to video or excuse me, shot on video. Give it a watch. If you like The Toxic Avenger, this is actually, I think, a progression from the first Toxic Avenger in storytelling for Lloyd Kaufman and his crew. And there's some interesting bizarreness in this movie. If you are a war movie buff, this is going to be something really different, and why not? Throw it in there. It probably would be great sandwiched between Rambo 2 and Tropic Thunder, right in the middle. You're going to transition nicely, and that's going to be something to do. Plus, this is one of those movies you should probably have on hand if you like to be like to your friends who are kind of white bread and vanilla. Hey, you want to see something different? Show them TROMA'S War.
You know what? I did, since you said that, I wanted to add in that since if you liked Airplane, but you wish it was a little bit closer to the third rail, like TROMA'S War definitely had some Airplane vibes the whole time I was watching.
True. It always comes back to Leslie Nielsen. So thank you guys so much for listening. This has been another episode of Cult and Classic. As always, we're going to have the Chud play us off with All About Evil. As a note, the clips played in the show are for review purposes only and are the property of the copyright holders for these films. Please check these films out and support them. If anything we say sounds interesting, then they're worth a watch. And send us your recommendations for films to cultandclassic@gmail.com. Thanks again to Nick for recommending The Beast, aka The Beast of War. It was great fun. And join our Patreon at patreon.com/cultandclassicpodcast. Thanks much. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit cultandclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.